when you lack information, all you have to go on is instinct. If you lack data, you're going to be high instinct, which means you're going to be high emotion, right? So you don't want to be making these decisions emotionally.
Hello and welcome to the Remarkable CEO Podcast, a show dedicated to chiropractors who want to transform their job into a business so that they can have a remarkable practice as part of a remarkable life, not instead of one. With your hosts, Dr. Pete Camiolo and Dr. Stephen Franson.
What's up, Remarkables? Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable CEO Podcast, Chiropractic's #1 business podcast. I'm Dr. Stephen Franson.
And I'm Dr. Pete Camiolo.
Hey, we are stoked to have this conversation today. We're just going to continue the conversation that we had last night. I don't know when you're listening to this, but I know what day it is for me. It's Friday morning. We just had an awesome webinar last night called the 7-Figure Associate Doctor Model. So if you are a scale doctor or you aspire to be a scale doctor, I know what you want to do. You want to scale well, right? So the only way to scale well is to get this associate doctor relationship right? So we're going to talk about the relationship. We're going to talk about the model, which means the business model. We're going to talk about the economics of this, right? So such an important part of the economics of this is your compensation model for your associate doctor. Dr. Pete, you and I were talking about this offline, about how many of these relationships just blow up, right? There's just terrible turnover. These 68% of these relationships fail. And we both know that the #1 reason that these relationships fail is the compensation model. And I'm really, really intentional about emphasizing that word model, because the question is not how much do I pay my associate doctor, but how do you pay your associate doctor, which speaks to the model. So we're going to have that conversation today. We're going to use the $1 million practice as an example, right? So a 7-figure business, because that's where we were playing last night. We want to look at what is the associate doctor model that really helps you produce that 7-figure practice. And I'd really like to go deep today. We're going to have our thinking caps on because we're going to talk about it through the lens of revenue per employee ratio, right? So, man, time to get that second cup of coffee. And if you hadn't had it already, you're going to want to have a pen and paper out for this conversation today. This is one that you're probably going to want to listen to a couple of times, right? Because we're going to get into the math, and it's all about creating you're turning your mission into a math problem, Dr. Pete, right? So we like to be 1 part gut, 2 parts data. This is very much going to be a data-driven conversation. Last thing I'm going to say on this is, for those of you who are like, rats, I can't believe I missed that webinar, right? So we're going to put a link to that webinar here in the show notes, so you can go back and check out that webinar. We went for like 75 minutes on the 7-figure associate doctor model. So you're going to have a link for that show in the show notes below. And we're also going to give you a link to a PDF that is jam-packed with value. It is our 6 most powerful associate doctor compensation models. So there's a PDF that outlines 6 different ways to set up a successful associate doctor compensation model. Dr. Pete, pure gold. It's a link for that will be in the show notes below.
Yeah, this is, already, I mean, just the 2 things you're going to get just from this podcast episode, those 2, the link to that webinar and then that PDF is just absolute gold. So, make sure that you take advantage of these things. I mean, this is, Dr. Stephen, things that I wish were available to us when we were building and hiring associates and getting this going. So again, it's a huge win for our profession to be able to have the resources available to them that are now available. And there's no reason, Dr. Stephen, at this point that we shouldn't be successful when it comes to building these $1 million practices. And by the way, this is, we're gonna use the $1 million practice as an example, but for a lot of the docs that we're working with now they're going to the next $1 million mark, and then the $3 million mark, and the $4 million mark, and beyond. So this applies to, we're going to use the $1 million mark, but recognizing this, we know that many of you have big visions and want to make an even bigger impact. And we know what the world needs right now is more successful chiropractors. They need chiropractic. Well, chiropractic needs more successful chiropractors. I skipped that one. Why? Well, the reality is that for us to be able to meet the need and demand, we have to become more successful. We have to become more sophisticated. We have to understand these things and apply them. We really need to mature. I think the word, Dr. Stephen, that I was thinking about for this episode was maturity. We talked about that. And there's an opportunity. You and I, we get the opportunity work with a lot of docs, and we see the ins and outs. We are in it, like very much. We're in it.
We are in it.
I don't know how else to describe it other than we're in it. And so, we know the nuances of everything from trying to find a player associate, and then, the whole, interviewing and the recruiting, and, they're dancing between 3 different options. And then why would they choose you versus another, to the decision to hire and everything that goes into doing that really well. And we're going to go through the steps, but there's so many opportunities for us to screw it up. And here's the thing, you don't need to. We actually put together the exact plan for you to do that and be successful here. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to figure it out. Let other people's pain, our scar tissue, our lessons. And honestly, having probably placed well over 1,000 associate doctors into practice at this point, let us actually help you be more successful here, Dr. Steven. This is going to be a powerful episode. I wanted to share one thing because I think from a perspective, it's so important to have perspective that, it's really important as a CEO and a leader that you have a perspective. We talk about the now, the next, and the ultimately. This is an ultimately conversation. You really need to have an ultimately view of your business if you're going to do this right. And we say ultimately, we say 3 years from now. And I know there's a much further view than just 3 years out, but you need to, at minimum, go into this conversation thinking 3 years out ultimately. And then 1 year out, that's next. And then now is the next 90 days. That's where we're at right now. And so, Dr. Steven, this is such a valuable discussion for us to have. And again, like you said, put your thinking caps on, sharpen your pencil, make sure that second cup of coffee is ready to roll because we're about to dig in.
Yeah, I love that you went there with the 3-year view. So take a 3-year view of your business, right? So just if all you hear from us today is that, right? So, and that's true in everything, not just in this subject matter. We're talking about associate doctors right now. This is like, take a 3-year view of your business. And when you bring on an associate doctor, it's like buying a business. Like if you were to buy a business, you would take a 3-year view of the business. You'd be like, okay, what's my return on investment and what's my return of investment, ROI, right? Return on investment and return of investment. Return on investment is an economic fact. A return of investment is time bound. How long is it going to take me to get my investment back? How long is it going to take me to break even, get to black, get my money back, right? So, and how much is it going to take me to get to profitability? 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 5 times my investment, right? So these are the questions that a sophisticated business person asks, right? It's economic and time bound. So looking at the 3-year view of a business, whether you were bringing on an associate, which is like buying a business, or you buying a pizza joint or a store that sells snow tires, doesn't matter. You would take a 3-year view and say, okay, first year, initially, I'm going to be upside down, right? So I'm making the investment. Now listen to me. An investment. You're making an investment. You're not buying a purchase. It's not a purchase, right? So you're making an investment. What does that mean? It means I'm going to take the money that I have here in my hand, or I'm taking on debt, whatever it is. I'm going to spend my money now with an expectation that I'm going to get a return in the future. That's what investing is, right? So when you take on an associate doctor, you have to have that investor hat on to make the best decisions, to be able to say, okay, so I'm going to make the investment now, and I'm going to bring this person. I'm going to use my money to buy somebody else's time, energy, focus, and talent to help me achieve my goals, to free up my time, energy, focus, and talent to help us achieve our goals. So what is the highest and best use of my time? That's called optionality. I'm going to get to choose, how do I spend my time, right? So you're making an investment. You bring in an associate doctor, you take a 3-year view of that relationship, that business, and you say, I'm going to be a bit upside down, most likely in most scenarios, right? Unless it's a total takeover situation. I'm going to be a bit upside down initially. And the goal is to get to black as quickly as I can, to get profitable as quickly as possible. The first year, I want to be profitable. The second year, I want to be more profitable. And by the third year, I want to be really profitable, right? So it's like, I want to be making good money with it, right? Just like any business, right? And then PS, by the end of you get to your third year, not only are you very profitable, but you also are building an appreciating asset that's cash flowing and you own it, right? So that's just a win. Like remember, as owners, we get paid 3 times: our salary, distributions of profits, and when we exit that business. So guys, what you're hearing me say to you, that you're in the catbird seat, okay? As a business owner, you have to make those decisions from the perch of the catbird seat. You're the investor, right? So Dr. Pete, when we have this conversation, it's really important that we get up and over that business and we look at it 3 years out. And like you and I were talking about before we started recording, is we actually have to cast a vision for that associate doctor that is 3 years out as well. Okay. So they've got to see this opportunity. They've got to understand that they're better off with us than without us, right? So that role of us as the business owner is very simple. Our job description is create environments where people know they're better off with you than without you. That's your job description ultimately, right? So cast that vision for that associate doctor. So when you have these associate doctor relationships that break and they fall apart and they unravel and they fail, like 68% of them do, there's like 100 reasons why it could get screwed up, right? Business is hard and relationships are hard. Business relationships are hard squared, right? It's hard, right? So you've got to make sure that you yourself have a clear vision. What does success look like before you hire an associate doctor, right? So what does success look like? What is your objectives? Are you trying to grow your impact? Are you trying to grow your income, your revenue? Like, is it all about increasing capacity and growth? Is it about time freedom for you? Like, I'm trying to claw back my time freedom so I can actually choose to do what I want to do with my time. Optionality. Are you trying to create durability, right? So versus just scalability. Are you trying to mitigate your exposure as being the only doctor in house, right? So you recognize you're exposed there. Are you looking for your legacy play? Like, is it an exit strategy? Are you looking for your successor? Dr. Pete, you got to be clear on exactly what are you trying to accomplish by bringing this associate doctor in. And then that's just table stakes to sit down at this table before you hire another professional. What do you want them to do? In other words, what's their job description? What job description do they need to fulfill to help you reach your goals? Like specifically, you bringing them in for attraction or conversion or retention, right? Like, what do you want them to do specifically? So you bring in the right avatar of doctor. Once you get the job model in place, and it's a job model that will energize their genius, you know which genius you're looking for, you got to get the compensation model right. So that comp model is going to energize them or drain their energy, right? So you've got to make sure that you know going into this, am I looking for a caregiver or a business builder? Or am I looking for an entrepreneur? And what comp model is the right one? Do they want security or do they want opportunity, right? So you could screw this up every which way till Sunday. Then you've got to onboard them properly, hire them, equip them, and then you got to continually develop them, right? You've got to make sure that you're constantly recognizing and celebrating and incentivizing them. Dr. Pete, man, that sounds like a lot. You know why? Because it is.
Yeah, and if it was easy, everybody would do it. And Dr. Stephen, we have a profession, an opportunity right now as a profession in chiropractic to scale as a profession. And again, we hear that word scale. It's very popular in the business space and business world, but within the context of chiropractic, it's very vague. It hasn't had the level of, again, organization, structure, and direction as it does right now. We now actually have that. We've brought structure, we brought organization, we brought a plan into place. There's an actual plan. There's a model. Right. That's why you think about businesses that fail. I was thinking about this and I know there's a lot of different statistics, but the business labor statistics, the Bureau of Labor in the U.S. says that, in the first 2 years, 20% of businesses failed. I've heard up to 90% of businesses fail within the first 1 year. The bottom line is this: the reason why businesses fail, and within 5 years, more than 45%, and within 10 years, there's probably 90% of businesses. Yeah, 90%. It's because they don't have a system. They don't have a model. They don't have a clear plan and a path to execute. Dr. Stephen, that's what we're presenting right now. Is we're saying there is a plan. There is a model. There's a structure and a system that you can actually implement and you can follow, and it will be successful. The thing is, you have to have that 3-year view. And I think this is where the maturity comes in, because it's not like the gumball machine where you put your 25 cents and you get your piece of gum out. You got to recognize, like, you're going to make an investment and there's going to be a lag time for you to get that return on the investment. Like you said, your goal in your first year is you want to have profitability, but it might be a small amount of profitability. That's a year. That's 365 days, right? You're talking about 26 payrolls that have to go through before you might feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm finally feeling like we're getting somewhere. But that's a lot of payrolls that have processed before you feel that sense of, okay, I feel like I made a good decision. It's starting to happen, So think about that, right? Because we don't lay awake at night worried about our practice. It's about the business. So you have to have a view of this so that you can sleep at night. We talk about having peace of mind. You don't get peace of mind without perspective. If you don't have this perspective, Dr. Stephen, In that first 6 months, you're like, nah, I'm not doing this thing. You'll bail.
Or sabotage it.
You can sabotage it. So as the leader, the first thing you said, Dr. Stephen, as far as challenges to overcome, getting clear on your vision. So important. You have to have a clear vision of what is success to you, because you're going to attract someone who aligns with that. So any lack of clarity creates a weakness in the bond that right out of the gate. And any weakness in the bond, that's an area for breakdown. And so you've got to have clarity right out of the gates. What are you trying to accomplish by bringing on an associate and getting clear on that? Dr. Stephen, it's not just about compensation. You said there were 2 or 3 things that were said even before we even got to comp. And even when we get to comp, there's layers to comp. And so, Dr. Stephen, there is a layer of complexity, but we have organized it. We have systematized this for you. So make sure you watch that 7-figure webinar. I know you're going to get into some more things right now, Dr. Stephen, but go watch that webinar. Get the 6 powerful associate comp plans. Get these things and use them. These are resources for you to help you be more successful.
100%. And I want you guys to know that I'm going to share content from it. It looks like it's probably 3 slides from last night's webinar, right? So there was 70 slides in the webinar. So you're getting a small taste of what we talked about. It was a serious business conversation. So you're going to want to watch that. And we're not going to try to tell the whole story. I just want to really double click on this concept of what does a 7-figure business look like? Meaning, let's just call it, to simplify, it's $1 million business, right? So to Dr. Pete's point, so many of our clients have busted through this $1 million mark, the 2 million, 3 million, 7 million. Our largest practice is 36 million and growing, right? So we're talking about, like, this applies and scales, to 100 million and beyond, right? So I'll let you know if we break it at 100 million. We just haven't hit that spot yet, but this thing scales. So just listen to what we're going to be describing and take these. They're constructs, right? So constructs scale. That's the power of learning a framework, right? So I want you to understand, we're going to look at the 7-figure business, a $1 million business, through the lens of revenue per employee ratio, right? So, like, what does a typical team look like when you're a $1 million practice? And guys, what we're going to do here is to simplify things. We're going to drill down and we're going to say a chiropractic practice, right? So it's like they're doing chiropractic care. I'm not going to get into what that entails, but whatever it is, like if you're like, well, we're an integrated practice, or we actually have a physical therapist here, we have an MD, DC, whatever. What I'm talking about is a chiropractic business. Okay. So the chiropractic business may be inside of the business you have, right? So put your thinking cap on. And what we're talking about is a $1 million chiropractic practice that focuses on delivering chiropractic care, right? So typically it sounds something like this. You're going to see that it is 388 patient visits a week at a $50 collection visit average. Let's just start there, right? So there were 2 levers, volume and price, okay? So the first lever was volume, 388 patient visits a week. The second lever was at a $50 collection visit average. Everybody get that? So there's 2 levers that you could pull. You could charge more, like take that 50 to 60 and drop that 388 down to what? 312, something like that, right? So if you charge more, you increase the price, you can decrease the volume, right? So everybody understands. Or you could decrease the price and increase the volume, right? So you can go in either direction. But right now, what we know around the country, for somebody who is running a cash or cash-like practice, which is a very common model for chiropractic care, looking at it from an on average basis, you're going to see a collection visit average of what does somebody pay for a chiropractic visit, a chiropractic adjustment nationwide in the US. It's going to fall somewhere between $45 and $55 per visit. That's a collection visit average. So we're just landing in the middle at $50. That's where we got there. Some of our clients charge $38. Some charge $138 for that adjustment. And I get it. Don't be distracted by that. We're just trying to give you a framework to work from. Run your numbers through it. If you need help, reach out to us and we'll help you run your numbers through it, right? So we've created an impact calculator. We can put all of the numbers in from your practice and it'll spit out. It'll tell us exactly what you need to start doing, stop doing, turn up, turn down, right? We'll show you exactly what that looks like. we've got to click the link in the show notes down below. You can schedule a call with one of us and we will walk you through that specifically for your practice if that would help you. Okay, we're happy to do it. For this conversation, the construct is we're charging $50 a visit. That breaks down to about 388 visits per week, 52 weeks a year, Dr. Pete. That gets us to $1 million. Okay. So if you keep that number in mind, 388, one DC, adjusting 388 people, that's hustling, right? At a $50 collection visit average, that's a one doctor, one DC, $1 million practice. Well, what if you were to do two doctors, right? So two DCs, maybe it's an owner plus an associate, or maybe you're the CEO and you got two associates, right? So there's one owner who's adjusting and they have one associate. It sounds something like this: 194 PVs a week at $50 collection visit average. We're just going to keep 50 as a constant. So now you get two docs. They're adjusting 194 visits per week each at a $50 collection visit average. That's $1 million in revenue or collections, right? So top line collections. Or maybe you got three doctors, right? So three doctors, it would be 130 patient visits per week at a $50 collection visit average, right? So I put an asterisk on that one, Dr. Pete, because this is where we start to break the RPE standard, right? The revenue per employee ratio. Okay. So bear with me. I'm going to explain that for you. Okay. So RPE is a critical wellness marker for a chiropractic business. I like to say that RPE is the HRV of a chiropractic business, right? So we love to use heart rate variability as a measurement of the autonomic nervous system, as an indicator of the health of the body's ability to adapt readily and appropriately through our nervous system, right? So if HRV is a wellness metric for a human being, RPE is a wellness metric for a chiropractic business, right? So to be a healthy chiropractic business, the economics of this is you should see $250,000 of top line revenue or collections per full-time employee ratio, full-time employee equivalent. Okay. So a couple of facts. Don't count yourself as an owner. This is for employees. So if you're the owning DC, how many employees do you have? And the terminology for a full-time employee or full-time employee equivalent. Okay. So here's what it sounds like. If you have part-time people, well, how do you figure out how many full-time employee equivalents you have? Well, so here's how we teach it. If somebody works up to 15 hours, count them as a 1/3 part-time person. If somebody works between 15 and 30 hours, consider them a 2/3 part-time person. If somebody works over 30 hours, consider them a 3/3 or full-time equivalent. So identify all the people on your team, your employees, figure out, are they a third, 2/3, or 3/3? List them all out, add up your thirds and total it, divide by 3. That's the number of full-time employee equivalents. So here's the big deal, Dr. Pete. Take your top line revenue or your collections per year, divide them by your number of full-time employee equivalents. And the standard, the remarkable standard for chiropractic of RPE or revenue per employee is $250,000 per full-time employee equivalent. RPE is the HRV of the chiropractic business.
I'm just letting that sit there for a minute, Dr. Steven. I'm just letting it sit. So there's a lot there, Dr. Steven. And what I think is great about this is it's a simple model that's a standard. And like you talked about, it's a standard. And if there's nuances to this and you have more questions, like you talked about the 2 DCs versus the 3 DCs, and there are levels of this. And like you said, we're not going to go down that track on a podcast, but there are elements of this where, Dr. Steven, we have a philosophy and a methodology that we teach, which is simply that you hire people ahead of growth. And so there's going to be timing is important. You talked about the ROI, the 2 different ways. You talked about the economic ROI and the timing ROI. And I think you have to have a sensitivity to both of those when you're doing your calculations and you're doing this, you're planning, because as a CEO, Dr. Steven, our role is strategic. Your role is strategic. You're thinking ahead. You don't have the luxury of just head down, bum up anymore. You don't. You have to be thinking ahead. So we say, let's take a 3-year view. Then you have your 1-year targets, and then you have your 90 days. What are we trying to accomplish? So we have to take all that into consideration. We think about the investments that we're making and making sure that we are capturing the ROI that you are capturing the ROI. So you know when it's time to bring on that first, second, third associate doctor. But I love what you just did there, which was made it so simple for us to calculate this, guy. So like you said, Dr. Stephen, RPE is the wellness metric of your practice. It's your HRV. So if you haven't done this, and I know so many of our docs who are listening have like, I do this now, and it's part of my annual planning. I use this, or quarterly. I do this quarterly, and I'm looking back every quarter. I look back 12 months, and I'm always looking at what's the run rate over the last 12 months. Is our RPE where it needs to be? And again, there's going to be questions you're going to have. So Dr. Stephen, that's why I would encourage, if you have questions, reach out to us. That's what we're here for, right? If you've got questions about this, need some support and help with this, we're happy to help you. Take advantage of the 75-minute deep dive with all the slides that you can look at in the webinar. Please take advantage of that. The link is in the show notes. And then also, when it comes to the comp model, which again, we didn't really get into that today, but those 7 powerful comp models are just so valuable for understanding this in a greater measure, because you're talking money and you're talking an exchange, a dollar value per doctor and per employee, because that goes into this. And there's layers of depth, which I know you went in through last night, but for today's conversation, Doc, this is vital.
Yeah. I mean, it's intimidating if you don't understand the math, right? So, because we're talking about bringing on an associate doctor, which you're like, okay, holy crap, right? So that's going to take my time, energy, focus, and my money, right? So right now we're just talking about the money piece of it. It's going to take your time, energy, and focus as well, right? This is investing all 4 of your limited resources. I want to make sure that you guys see the context of why were we talking about it this way, right? So you've got to be able to step forward boldly and with confidence, right? So otherwise this becomes, when you lack information, all you have to go on is instinct. If you lack data, you're going to be high instinct, which means you're going to be high emotion, right? So you don't want to be making these decisions emotionally, right? So we're telling you that this is economics, right? So you've got to be able to look at it and be like, okay, so can my business afford to bring on an associate doctor? Because as an associate doctor is going to cost you, a good associate doctor today is going to cost you a minimum 85 grand, right? It's going to be over 6 figures if you're a 7-figure business, right? So guys, the Joint starts their doctors now at $100,000 a year, the Joint, right? So if you don't think you're competing with the Joint, you need to wake up, right? And recognize that, well, we're so much better than the Joint. It's like, then why aren't you paying better than the Joint, right? So at the end of the day, the Joint is going to be setting standards way out in front of you, right? So you got to catch up, and you got to recognize it's okay. Because you know what? The most sophisticated minds in business, the venture capitalists, they recognize that it's okay. It's still a good investment. They're paying their doctors 100 grand at the Joint now. It's not because they're dumb. It's not that they're ignorant business people. They're the most well-informed business people, and they're running the numbers and be able to say, man, this is still a good business, right? So it's like, we can't afford to pay the doctor, the provider, 6 figures because we're going to drive 7 figures in revenue, right? And we understand how to do the math on this, which is what we're trying to share with you guys, is you've got to be able to arrive at this with peace of mind, to be able to say, okay, I'm extrapolating this out. I have my standards, $250,000 per full-time employee equivalent. I got it. If I'm going to be doing $1 million, like right now, if I'm the owner, now I'm an adjusting doctor, I bring in an associate doctor, it probably looks something like this. You got one associate doctor, you got one check-in CA, one check-out CA who's probably being groomed to be your office manager, and one floor CA who works as your tech CA and new patient concierge. That's you, one owner plus 4 employees. 4 times 250,000 gets us to the $1 million, right? So guess what? You right there, you plus 1 associate doctor, that's you plus 4 employees or full-time employee equivalents. You are behaving, right? So you are operating in accordance with the $250,000 per full-time employee. And to your point, Dr. Pete, you're also in that position, ready to hire your next person so that you can create capacity to grow into the next zone without your team experiencing overwhelm. And you're running right into what's called a break point, where if you're at 250,000 with your 4 employees, you're at $1 million, you're at break point 4, right? So every $250,000 is a break point. Break point 1 is when you're at 250,000 in revenue. Break point 2 is when you're at 500,000. Break point 3 is at 750. Break point 4 is at $1 million. Break point 5 is at 1.25, right? So each of these break points is where your business would start breaking. And very often the breaking happens because your team is overwhelmed, right? So they literally start pumping the brakes before the machine itself breaks and breaks down, right? So, and that's when things get really expensive. Dr. Pete, it's so important that we can make these decisions understanding the economics of it. The language of business is accounting. And if you don't speak accounting, you don't understand your business, right? So part of what we're doing here at the Remarkable CEO podcast is trying to help create a fluency for you. So you have an understanding. You don't have to believe us. You can understand us, right? We want to create understanders here. We want you to be like, oh, okay, I get the math on this. My business is ready to hire an associate, or I am late to hire my next associate, or I am late to add my next CA, et cetera, right? So these economic rules are so that you can make these decisions boldly and with confidence and with peace of mind, right? So, because ultimately, it's the leader who's making data-driven decisions. That's 1 part gut, 2 parts data. That's going to be making better decisions and is a better person to work for. They become a better leader because nobody wants to work for a crazy person. Nobody wants to work with somebody who's just making all of their decisions and their leadership style is based in emotion as opposed to being data-driven.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Remarkable CEO podcast. Remember, what the world needs now is chiropractic, and what chiropractic needs now is more successful chiropractors. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. And if you'd like to connect with us personally, direct message us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Now go and be remarkable.